Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca. We are recapping all the action across the NBA playoffs from the last week and some interesting news out of the EPL and La Liga. But before we get into it, you guys know what to do. If you're new to the channel, take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And for my Spotify listeners, if you give us a 5-star review, it makes a massive difference. All links are in the description. Denver, as I expected, once the series shifted back to the Mile High City, things were heavily in their favor. They got to run at the pace that they were comfortable with, and also KD and Book weren't shooting at such a historic clip that we saw in games 3 and 4 on their home floor in Phoenix. Another great performance from Nikola Jokic, a triple-double. He's known for that. And he followed that up with closing out the Phoenix Suns in a 30-point triple-double on the road. The game started off neck and neck thanks to Phoenix's campaign substituting for CP3 in the point guard spot. He had a pretty stellar night, but just didn't get any help from even Devin Booker or Kevin Durant until it was much too late. By halftime, just like what happened last year in Game 7 between the Phoenix Suns and Dallas Mavericks, the Suns trailed by 30 points in an elimination game on their home floor, and it coincidentally led to their undoing. The Phoenix Suns have been eliminated in 6 games, this time to the top-seeded Denver Nuggets. We have to talk about just their shortcomings. I mean, Kevin Durant, his jump shot wasn't the same consistency in games 5 and 6 as it was in that previous stint at home in 3 and 4. And then Booker was simply a guy that ran out of gas as well. Like I said, it was really just Cam Payne who was leading the way with 31 points. Game 6, DeAndre Ayton also didn't play, so that's something else to keep in mind, and that led to Nikola Jokic basically having his way with Phoenix's backup center, and they also sprinkled in some minutes with Bismack Biyombo as well. It was slim picking for the Phoenix Suns, who were already bereft of depth that we've seen, and they lost by a handed margin. To dissect Phoenix post-mortem, now that they've been eliminated from the postseason, they promptly dismissed head coach Monty Williams on Saturday. Now, he was great in building up Phoenix from their days in the bubble. They went undefeated, barely missing out on the postseason in 2021, traded for Chris Paul. Immediately got to the finals, had a 2-0 series lead, just couldn't get the job done against Giannis and the Bucks. Flamed out after having the best record in the NBA last season, just the second round, and then this time, yet again, conference semifinals appearance with acquiring KD, but just ran out of gas in the conference semifinals. With that, Monty Williams is out. Obviously, when you acquire a franchise, you want to make some big-time moves. We saw that with the KD trade. Axing Monty Williams is probably not the best move in my opinion, but this is Matt Ishiba's team, and what he wants to do is probably, we're hearing at this moment, is rumors of recruiting Ty Lue away from the LA Clippers. And Ty Lue has been a phenomenal head coach already. I mean, he's won a championship with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Then for the LA Clippers, they made their first Western Conference Finals appearance in franchise history, has changed the culture and prolonged their stay in the postseason. These things are starting to run sour out in LA. He's not getting a lot of help from his players who are constantly injured, and I think ownership also is growing frustrating with the progress that the Clippers are, because as they're trying to build a new stadium in 2024, 2025, they're trying to open up that new arena with a contending team. I don't know if the Clippers are there just yet given the status of their franchise, and Phoenix is definitely a really happening place. We know that they have a ton of options as well for head coach. There's Nick Nurse, there's Coach Bud, and even Kevin Young, who is actually an assistant head coach of Monty Williams, so he could be elevated to head coach as well. But we'll see what happens on the head coaching side. To talk about their roster, the KD trade obviously killed their roster depth. Last season, they had Cam Johnson, they had McCall Bridges, CP3, DeAndre Ayton, to go along with Devin Booker, and then other pieces like Jay Crowder as well. Now, Crowder has been shipped out, and then we've seen other players get shuffled out due to the Kevin Durant trade, because that is a player that requires a whole lot of return on investment in terms of assets. With that, this meant that their depth was next to nothing. I mean, it was really just campaign. You saw a little bit of Okogie. You saw some Landry Shamet as well. Even Terrence Ross, who I'm surprised didn't get a ton of minutes until the injury bug started to hit the Phoenix Suns team. It's just slim pickings from there, unfortunately, for Phoenix. I think the biggest thing now that they're going to be trying to do in this offseason is retool. There are already rumors that the Suns are looking to trade DeAndre Ayton. Now, DeAndre Ayton was the top overall pick in 2018. He is kind of a Arizona homegrown talent. He went to University of Arizona. Pretty easy there for Phoenix to get their scouts out there. They really liked him. They took him over Luka Doncic. Also, Trae Young, to name a couple of names in that 2018 draft. The domino effects of that hasn't translated to a ton of success for Phoenix. This was mainly due to the further elevation and development of Devin Booker, the acquisition of CP3, the veteran leadership that they're getting from him at the point guard spot, and then later we see Kevin Durant. But in this series, DeAndre Ayton hasn't really been a guy that shows a lot of high motor. Even historically, prior to this series, he's been a guy that hasn't shown the biggest motor. It takes a lot to activate those God-given talents that he has, which are getting on the block, being a double-double machine. He can easily give you 20 and 10. It's just a matter of effort and will. We just don't get that consistently out of DeAndre Ayton. He has all the tools, all the physical gifts. It's just the want, the drive, and we don't really see that out of DeAndre, and it's been getting called out by numerous players. I mean, Jay Williams on ESPN called him out through 2 segments on their show. He's been getting dragged through the mud. I don't know how his postseason or poor postseason this season is going to translate to his trade value. Now, we're also hearing that Chris Paul could be on the trade block. He's 38 years old. I don't know what you can really get for Chris Paul at this point. I think you just need to worry about getting some Chris Paul depth. You need to prepare for Chris Paul getting hurt because he hasn't been the most reliable in his career. I mean, even back in his Clippers days, he had injury bug hit him at the worst time in the postseason, and even Rockets days. And now this season with the Phoenix Suns, he just hasn't been able to get over that injury bug. It's just poorly timed injuries, and he's also getting older. Like I said, he's 38. So those are going to happen. I think getting more point guard depth is vital for the Phoenix Suns. Getting some actual wing defenders and an additional scoring punch that can take some pressure off of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. I think the perimeter is fine. They can maybe add in a couple of shooters. They already have Landry Shamet, so that's fine there. I think adding another shooter and getting a true rim protector would be pretty good. They need to find a way to get consistent scoring and better defending on the perimeter. So with the Phoenix Suns flame out in the second round, what does this mean for Kevin Durant? We know that the trade for Kevin Durant wasn't an immediate move into title contention. A lot of people maybe elevated them to an elite Western Conference team, but you could clearly see when depth is tested, and that was due to the trade to get Kevin Durant to Phoenix. They benefited due to injuries thanks to the Clippers, injuries to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, but the pendulum swung the other way in round 2 where Chris Paul got hurt and then later DeAndre Ayton. So the bench depth was completely on life support at that point for the Phoenix Suns. For Kevin Durant next season, it's championship or bust expectations. He hasn't been able to prove that he can win in this league without the deck being heavily stacked in his favor. In his Warriors days, pretty much no one else could defend the Warriors. I mean, they were a 73-9 team prior to his arrival, and he just tipped the scale heavily in their favor. I mean, it took injury to himself and Klay Thompson for the Toronto Raptors in 2019 to beat the Golden State Warriors. We can talk about them being healthy, that they were probably one of the most unstoppable teams of all time in NBA history. In 2021 with the Brooklyn Nets, he had Kyrie, he had James Harden. The injury bug there, yes, because Kyrie got hurt, and then James Harden was hampered by the hamstring injury, but still they took Giannis and the Bucks to 7 games, and he had a toenail on the line that could have sent them to the conference finals, and I think that might have propelled them to a championship. It's just a game of inches, absolutely. But last season with the Brooklyn Nets, they flamed out being swept by the Boston Celtics. So next season, there's a lot of pressure on this Phoenix Suns team between ownership and Matt Ishiba, finding a new coach, retooling the roster, pressure on Booker, and big-time pressure on Kevin Durant. Because as much as we like to say that he's a two-time champ, two-time finals MVP, I think legacy-wise, he's going to have to win another championship to prove that he can do it without the Warriors system. I was really surprised to see the Philadelphia 76ers steal Game 5 because as much of an emotional roller coaster that was Game 4, I thought there might have been a letdown and Boston would recalibrate in coming back to their home floor. But they didn't seem at all urgent and they fell flat, they were slow, and Philly took advantage of that. They had a chance to close out this series in 6 and make their first Eastern Conference Finals appearance since 2001, those Allen Iverson days. In Game 6, it was a very nip and tuck game. In the third quarter, the Sixers had some advantages, but then they couldn't really put the Celtics out of reach. And finally, in the fourth quarter, after starting the game, I believe 1 for 11, Jason Tatum, he caught fire. I mean, he had 13, 14 points, and this saved the Celtics season. I mean, this was an elimination game for the Celtics. Just like last year when the Milwaukee Bucks had home court and they had a chance to seal the series in 6 games, Jason Tatum saved the Celtics there. And in the final 4 minutes of Game 6, we didn't see Joel Embiid touch the ball, and that's not getting it done as the MVP. You're a 7'1". You got to get on the block, demand that ball, and post up because, I mean, I know Al Horford is a very good defender. I know they have Time Lord and Robert Williams, but there's just a size disadvantage there. You are 30 pounds heavier than they are. You're taller than they are as well. And there's a way to get in there, at least get them into foul trouble, and he wasn't aggressive enough. James Harden turned back into a pumpkin like we expected him. He did his part. He gave you the 2 40-point performances. That's something we haven't seen out of James Harden. He exceeded expectations. I can't blame James Harden for that because that's what he's been the last 3-4 seasons. And then in Game 7, we saw a very close affair for much of the first half. Some momentum was favoring the 76ers where they almost had a 10-point lead, but turnovers put the Celtics back into this game. And it was only a 3-point lead in the Celtics' favor by halftime. And then early in the third quarter, it was tied. And then in the blink of an eye, towards the end of the third quarter, it was over. 20-point deficit, season over. There's no way coming back from that. You could just see. The Boston Celtics outscored the Philadelphia 76ers 33-10. 10 points in a Game 7. And Jason Tatum had 17 of those points in the third quarter. En route to a 51-point performance. Something we haven't seen since Steph did it 2 weeks ago, but this is only the second 50-point game in NBA history in a Game 7. The fourth quarter, they just simply poured it on en route to an easy victory, and now the Celtics are back in the Eastern Conference Finals. Joel Embiid in a Game 7 shot 5 out of 18. 5 out of 18. That is putrid. You are the MVP. You have asked to get your respect. You have been tired of coming second to Nikola Jokic and other players in the MVP rankings. Now you got your trophy. You got your praise. We at least expect you to get to the conference finals now. You have James Harden, who gave you 2 40-point performances in this series. You missed a game. You're not doing your part. You look exhausted in Game 3. Work on your cardio, man. Show up in the fourth quarter. Show up in a Game 7. You're not getting it done. You are a player that's way too talented to not get past the second round of the NBA playoffs. Every time you play the Celtics, you come up short. I mean, you said it yourself a few years ago, right? Every time they play us, they kick our ass. At least this time you pushed them to 7. You weren't swept this time, right? I know he's injured, but that's part of it. You're injured all the time. So we should be expecting you to play injured, and you still put up pretty good numbers, right? Be more available. Take care of your body. Work on your cardio. Do the little things. Because right now, you're not getting it done, man. You're not. It's not good enough. You have to be better. A lot of people are also going to get into Doc Rivers. Maybe he may not be back next season. So what? It's just another coach that we're just going to put in. No coach is safe anymore. I mean, Monty Williams, who had the best record in the NBA last season, was fired. Dwayne Casey had the best record, leading the Raptors to a 59-win season, was fired. Coach of the Year doesn't matter anymore. This goes back to players. The Sixers haven't made the Eastern Conference Finals in over 20 years. Major changes are coming to Philly, absolutely. James Harden is already flirting with returning to Houston. We don't know. They have a boatload of money in cap space. I'm sure he's going to bank on that and just play his last few days of his career in Houston, where his career truly began. The Sixers face a pivotal offseason coming up. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's another disappointing year for the 76ers. The Miami Heat closed out the New York Knicks in 6 games, and Game 6 was played on Friday. Game 5, to rewind a little bit, was a closely contested affair, at least in the fourth quarter. Going into the fourth quarter, the Knicks were in control for much of that game, coming back to New York in Madison Square Garden, and a couple times we saw Jimmy Butler and the Heat get a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and the deficit was as close as 2 points. The Knicks found a way to hold on. It just felt like they were choking this game away. I thought when the series shifted back to New York, they wouldn't have a ton of fight and the series would be over in 5, but give them credit, they pushed it to 6, even almost 7 games. In Game 6 it was a very tight affair, but this couldn't get over the hump, mainly because they're just not getting enough help from their supposed all-star in Julius Randle. I talked a couple times on this platform about Julius Randle's shortcomings, especially in the postseason. He hasn't been a guy to elevate himself in the postseason. Actually, he's played significantly down in the postseason. He didn't shoot above 30% in the 2021 postseason, and then in this postseason run, he shot under 40%. As an all-star, that is just atrocious play. I mean, he was dragged through the mud by Stephen A. Smith. He was saying how his bad play is it's like a virus. And you could see it. When he doesn't get a shot going, it's just infectious in the worst way possible. I mean, it just sends shockwaves. I mean, Emmanuel Quickly, poor performance. We saw RJ Barrett have a 1 for 10 performance. Really, if he didn't make free throws, he would have probably single digits. 3 out of 14 in an elimination game isn't going to cut it. No excuses there. I just really question his motor and that consistency that we see in the postseason. I know that he'll probably stay around and he'll kind of be demoted to being the second guy, maybe even the third guy if the Knicks acquire somebody else this offseason. The Knicks need another guy to catapult them to Eastern Conference contention, and then probably add in more shooting. Going back to Stephen A., he was really trying to chomp at the bit at Tom Thibodeau to get in Evan Fournier, who is known to be a shooter. I don't think Fournier would move the needle in this series, but definitely doesn't hurt to play him a few minutes. He didn't really see much time off the bench, which was a head-scratching move by Tom Thibodeau. I still think he's a very good head coach. The Knicks have some pieces, but in order to move ahead in the Eastern Conference and make deeper runs, they're going to have to add more talent. After the Lakers took a 3-1 series lead by the time of my last recording, we saw the Golden State Warriors punch back once they got back to the Bay Area in resounding fashion. A 121-106 victory kind of put some doubt in a few people's minds because the role players stepped up, but that's just because they play at home. Role players naturally play better at home. Wiggins was really good. We saw Draymond put his second 20-point performance this postseason, something we haven't seen since maybe 2018. So it's good to see those two guys stepping it up. In Game 6, the Lakers came out like gangbusters. I mean, it was an avalanche, 27-10 midway through the first quarter. And if it wasn't thanks to Steph getting some free throws and making a couple of threes, the deficit would have been much larger. Actually, it was only 5 heading into quarter number 2. Even Dante DiVincenzo had a little bit of a run too to make it a game in the second quarter, but after he drew his third foul, it was advantage Lakers. We saw Austin Reeves get loose for a couple nice baskets, including a half-court prayer to put momentum firmly back in LA's favor. And in the third quarter, we saw another avalanche, this time from the Lakers. And as much as the Warriors tried to fight back, it was just to no avail. The Lakers are moving on to their second trip to the Western Conference Finals in 4 seasons, and now the Golden State Warriors, the defending champs, have been eliminated. The first time Steve Kerr has been eliminated as Warriors head coach in the Western Conference playoffs. Every other time he's made it at least to the NBA Finals. To detail about Klay Thompson, I think he's just shown that he hasn't been the same guy. I don't think he'll have another all-star team in his career. And that's sad to say, but absolutely, I mean, this is just part of recovering from injuries like an Achilles and an ACL injury. He can still be a shooter, but I don't think he should command these max dollars that he had off this bigger contract that he signed in 2019. He'll be expected to take a pay cut, and I do hope that he does to remain with the Golden State Warriors. Now, Draymond, I thought maybe if something went wrong and his play was particularly the same way it has been most of this season, that he wouldn't be back. I think he will also take a pay cut and he will remain with the Golden State Warriors. And now the doubt will be about Jordan Poole, because he was a virtual no-show in this postseason. And also with the locker room issues between him and Draymond, don't know what happened there. Hopefully, they get to run back this team as a whole. I think they have to retool. Need wing defending. That's the biggest thing. They got destroyed for much of this season off very good guards who can handle. They picked and rolled guys apart. They need better rim protection as well. I mean, Draymond is good as a small ball center, but he's not the best rim protector. He's good on the perimeter. He's good on the block, but I don't want him to be blocking shots because he doesn't have that type of athleticism. So they need to find some rim protection there. We also don't know if Steve Kerr's head is in another run either. I mean, he's had health issues before, but obviously going to knock on wood that he's going to be all right and ready to go for next season. I do think the whole nucleus will be back, but this upcoming season in 2024 will be kind of the last hurrah of this Golden State nucleus that we may see before significant changes, before Steph hits the true back end of his career. To preview the Eastern Conference Finals, it's a rematch of last year's conference finals, and we're getting the bubble rematches in 2020. To dive into the series, the Celtics have home court advantage, being the 2 seed, and the Miami Heat are the first 8 seed since the New York Knicks to make the conference finals. Now, I do like this Heat team. They have a ton of veteran prowess with Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra being probably the best head coach left in the postseason, but I do think the run ends here. I mean, the Celtics have a ton of depth. Now, do they play to their standards or do they play to their talent? Not always. And that's why I think this series could go 6 games. But I don't think this is a long series like that epic 7-game series that we saw last season with the Celtics winning there. I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmy Butler proves us wrong yet again. I think the injuries to the Miami Heat in terms of Victor Oladipo and Tyler Hero finally catch up to them. And this is when Jimmy can only do so much to lead the Miami Heat, because they faced Giannis in the Bucks without Giannis for 2 games, right? And then they played the New York Knicks, who were happy to be there, but they just don't have a ton there. I think the Celtics have had a lot harder battles beforehand, and I think this time they'll prove it again and beat the Miami Heat and go back to the NBA Finals for the 2nd season in a row. The Lakers are heading to their 2nd conference finals appearance in 4 years, and they'll be taking on the Denver Nuggets. This is a rematch of the bubble series in 2020. The Lakers beat the Nuggets in 5 games, and this is a different Nuggets team. In the 3 years since, Nikola Jokic had pulled off 2 MVP trophies, finished 2nd this year, and this year they're the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. I think this time the Nuggets have some distinct advantages. This time they have Aaron Gordon to defend LeBron James. He did a pretty good job slowing down Kevin Durant. Going to face a similar matchup with LeBron. They have a healthy Jamal Murray. He was healthy in 2020, but I think this time he's learned a lot more. He's more seasoned, and he'll be a lot better than he was in the conference finals. Then we have Michael Porter Jr., who's taken numerous strides this season in his development. They have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who used to be on the Lakers in 2020. Now he's on the other side of this matchup. Yes, they have been battle tested this season. They've retooled to this really deep team. I think they can go just as deep as the Denver Nuggets. The real question is who's going to win this matchup, but also just the one-on-one matchup between the bigs in Anthony Davis and Nikola Jokic. I think this is a classic case of unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The immovable object is Anthony Davis, who's leading the NBA postseason in blocks per game. He's been killing it, protecting the rim, weak slide blocking, whatever the case may be, he's swatting it all. Nikola Jokic has had iconic performances. I mean, he had a 50-point game and 11 assists, something you just don't see out of centers these days. He's not athletic, but he's just so skilled, and that's the difference that I see out of Nikola Jokic. It's really hard to make a pick. I'm a Lakers fan and I love what they've done post-trade deadline and how the postseason has worked out in their favor. But I think this Nuggets team is different. The altitude is going to be a factor. I think they're going to really run really hard and fast. The Lakers like to run too, but I think this is a different dimension when the Denver Nuggets get going, especially at that altitude in Denver. I think game one probably going to go to the Denver Nuggets, and then the Lakers get a split because LeBron uses those game ones as like a measuring tool. He's just floating things around. We can't put a lot of investment into game one. He'll make adjustments, they'll come back, and I think the Lakers will win a tight game two. Game 3 and 4 I think also will be split, and then that means the Nuggets reclaim home court advantage in that LA stretch. And then game 5, I think that's really determines who wins this, because it's either Lakers in 6 or Nuggets in 7 for me. I don't think the Lakers can win multiple games in Denver, and I think the Nuggets can fish out at least one game in LA. So with that, I'm going to take the Denver Nuggets in 7 games, and they'll be making their first ever NBA Finals appearance. Barcelona has been crowned champions of La Liga, and this is their first title since 2019. Now, I think this is something to celebrate after a few years of poor play in Champions League. I mean, yes, they haven't been the same team throughout Europe, but even in Spain, they haven't been able to do so, and this kind of led to Lionel Messi's departure, Barcelona, and now them at least getting this title back, reclaiming Spain, being kings of Spain after 4 years is something really nice to see. Robert Lewandowski had another goal in this historic season that he's had in his first year in La Liga. I think he's been on it for much of this season, and now this goal against Espanyol, who rioted after the game because they are heading towards relegation, unfortunately. And now Barcelona celebrates their La Liga title on Espanyol's home field. I think Espanyol fans felt disrespected in that regard, so I get it. It's tough. I think, overall Spanish football is very, very suspect in terms of fan culture, respectful to the players. We've seen a lot of racist stuff going on. Same thing happens in Italy too. Definitely, it's good to see that Barcelona is back atop the table in Spain once again. Arsenal lost 3-0 to Brighton, and I think this will pretty much seal the deal for Manchester City. Man City coasted to a win against Everton. They were in a little bit of a tight battle for the first 30 minutes, and then 2 goals between Ilkay Gundogan and then Erling Haaland made it 2-0. Ilkay Gundogan made another goal to make it 3-0, and it was pretty much over from there. They still have 3 matches to play, while Arsenal only has 2. As long as Man City beats Chelsea next Saturday, they clinch the English Premier League title, and that will be their 5th in 6 years. I don't know how historic that amount of success has been in the English Premier League, but I'll have to look that up. But I mean, that is just dominance. And they lost in 2020 only slightly to Liverpool, if I remember correctly. So it's really almost 6 straight titles, and that's just true dominance in one of the most parity-driven leagues in Europe, where you're probably used to seeing teams flip-flop for the title every few seasons. But in terms of this amount of dominance, it's just wild. And congrats to Man City. I mean, they're on the cusp of doing something historic. They're on the cusp of completing the treble. If they win Saturday, they get one part of that. They beat Manchester United, that's part 2. And then the biggest one is being champions of Europe. So I do see them completing the treble. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. I know that was a lot to get in there, but thank you so much for tuning in. You guys know what to do. All links are in the description, so take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. For my Spotify listeners, give us a 5-star review. And until next time, I'll catch you on the next podcast.